Have you ever heard someone cry in the middle of nowhere, so deep in the night that the sound seems to come from inside your own head? Well, that's what happened to me up in the Abajo Mountains, the fall of '96. I was driving back from a hunt, tired, with my rifle on the passenger seat and the smell of firewood still clinging to my jacket. The radio was just static between stations when I heard it. A cry, thin, shaky, almost human. I stopped the truck because I thought someone was hurt. The mountains up there don't forgive those who get lost. The air was already cold enough to kill in a few hours. I opened the door and just stood, listening. The sound came from the trees deep inside, where the trail almost disappears, and there was something about that cry, a kind of desperation that made your chest tight, as if the person knew they were being left to die. I should have turned the ignition and driven home. But when that voice, because it wasn't just a cry anymore, called my name very softly, something inside me broke. How could someone out there know who I was? And that's where it all began. At that time, I lived alone on a piece of land my father bought after the war. It's about 6 miles outside Blanding, up a gravel road few people still used. The house was simple, wood darkened by the sun, 2 rooms and a crooked porch from which I could see the Abajo Mountains fade into the horizon. It was cold up there all year round, and at night the silence felt like a living thing. Since Helen died in '93, my life had become routine. Woke up early, made black coffee, fixed up pickup truck engines for the neighbors, hunted deer when the season allowed. It was the only way to feel useful, to not think too much. The radio stayed on all day on AM, playing sermons and farm news. I avoided going to town. I avoided people, really. The old Navajos who passed through sometimes stopped to exchange a few words. They spoke little, with that silent respect of theirs. Some would mention strange things happening further south, sounds of voices in the hills, footprints that didn't look human, cattle found without eyes. I'd listen, laugh it off, thank them, and change the subject. I wasn't a man to believe in superstition. That week I'd gone hunting just to clear my head. Something was bothering me, a kind of weight that wasn't physical. I walked all day among pines and slopes, and when the sun went down, I took the valley road back, thinking I'd be home before midnight, but the mountain keeps what is hers. And that night, it seemed she wanted to show me something. The road back was just gravel and dust kicking up behind the truck. The moon was hidden by low clouds and the headlights seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. I was already past Cottonwood Canyon when I first heard it. A thin, muffled sound. It sounded like a woman crying. At first, I thought it was a coyote, or maybe the wind passing between the rocks. But that cry had rhythm. It had a pause. It sounded too human. I slowed the gear, let the engine die, and opened the window. Silence took over everything. Then again, closer. A weak sob, like someone trying to call for help and failing. I grabbed the flashlight from the cab and got out of the truck. The air was still, freezing, and the smell of wet earth rose from the ground. I walked a few feet to the start of the trail. That's where the sound was coming from, in the direction of the tall rocks the locals called Broken Teeth. No animal usually passed through there, and the reservation hunters avoided that part of the mountains. As I tried to listen better, the sound changed. It wasn't crying anymore. It was a voice, a woman's voice, saying very low, hoarse, "Please, help me." I felt my skin prickle. The flashlight shook in my hand. I took a step back and thought about getting back in the truck, but the voice repeated itself, weaker, closer, and this time it said my name. "Earl." I froze. It couldn't be a mistake. That voice, it sounded too much like Helen's. My heart started beating so hard I thought I might pass out right there. And even knowing it made no sense, that it couldn't be real, I found myself walking into the woods, following the sound like someone follows a memory. The trail quickly disappeared among the pines. The The flashlight beam only cut through about 6 feet ahead. The rest was shadow and wind. With every step, the sound seemed to shift its location, now to the left, now deeper, as if something was watching me and backing away each time I got closer. The terrain grew steeper and I stumbled on hidden roots. The crying returned, now more desperate, as if she were injured. "Here, please," the voice said. Her breathing seemed to mix with mine, echoing between the rocks. I kept going, feeling my stomach churn. The smell of earth gave way to another, strong, metallic, like old blood. It was impossible to tell where it came from, but it reminded me of the butcher shop where I worked as a boy. I reached a small clearing lit by the flashlight and the dead light of the stars. There, leaning against a rock, I saw what looked like a woman. She was crouched with long hair covering her face, trembling as if cold. "Are you okay?" I asked, without getting too close. She didn't answer, just cried softly, swaying gently. Her voice was exactly like my wife's, even in the way she sobbed. When I took another step, she slowly raised her head. The flashlight caught only half her face, pale, dirty skin, eyes too sunken to be normal. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but the sound that came out wasn't human. It was a long, throaty moan that made my knees buckle. The woman turned her body and moved on all fours, quickly, in a direction I didn't even know existed there. Her sound faded away among the rocks, and before I could decide what to do, I heard it again. "Oh, follow me?" That voice no longer sounded like Helen's. Something was wrong with it, as if it was trying to imitate, but forgetting how to speak properly. And yet, I followed. The first thing I thought was that someone might be playing a trick on me. Hunters, maybe. Thoughtless people trying to pull a prank. But out here, so deep in the mountain, midweek with the temperature near freezing, it didn't make sense. Still, I tried to convince myself that was all it was. A hoax, a coincidence, some random echo. I kept climbing, slower now. The flashlight started to flicker, and the wind carried the sound as if it came from inside the stones. The follow me became more insistent, but also weaker, as if the thing was losing strength. I knew I should go back. Every part of my body told me to go back, but there was something in that voice, a kind of pain that didn't feel fake, and I never could leave anyone behind, not even when Helen got sick, and the doctors said there was nothing more to be done. Maybe that's why I kept walking. It wasn't courage, it was guilt. The trail ended near a stone wall. To the left, a dark opening, too small to be a cave, but big enough for someone to enter. You could feel the cold air coming out of it, like a breath. "Oh!" the voice whispered again. Now it sounded deeper, as if coming from the center of the earth. I knelt near the entrance, the light shaking over the ground covered in leaves and small bones. Rabbits, perhaps. Or not. The smell was horrible. I grabbed the lighter and an improvised torch from my hunting kit. When the flame ignited, something inside the darkness quickly retreated. I only saw a movement, a wet sheen. And then that sound, a cry, mixed with laughter. I took a deep breath. "If there's anyone in there, I'll help," I shouted. And it was in that instant I realized the voice wasn't coming from in front of me, it was coming from behind. You, listening to this, might think I should have run, right? Well, if I had, maybe I'd still be sleeping peacefully today. But since I've gotten this far, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe, because what comes next is not the kind of thing you hear twice. When I turned, the flame almost went out. The air seemed to vanish. Behind me, the trail was empty, only the sound of the wind scraping against the dry leaves. And then something moved among the trees, slow, dragging. The torchlight trembled, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure standing, hunched over, as if its bones no longer knew where they belonged. It looked like a woman, but the movements were wrong, very wrong. It took a step, then another. Its head turned at a strange angle, and the sound coming from its throat was a cry and a growl at the same time. Each time it tried to say, "Follow me," the voice came out broken, as if it had forgotten how to use its mouth. I backed up, stumbling over rocks, and the flame illuminated enough for me to see the feet, if you could call them feet. They were long, thin, almost like a deer's, covered in something that looked like stripped skin. I tried to raise the rifle, but my hands were shaking too much. The thing stopped about 15 feet away from me and just stood there, staring. Its breathing was short, ragged, and the eyes, they had a wet, human sheen. They looked sad. "Can you hear me?" I asked, not knowing why. It slowly moved its lips, trying to form words. "Cold, home," it said with a hoarse, failing voice. "And then you left me." It was like being punched in the chest. It was Helen. It couldn't be, but it was. The same sentence she told me before she died, in the hospital bed. The creature took another step, and I realized the sound of its bones breaking in the movement, but instantly reassembling afterward. The smell of burnt meat filled the air. I darted into the cave without thinking. It was the only way to get away from it. Inside, the darkness swallowed everything. The walls were damp, and the ceiling seemed to pulse with the sound of my breathing. Behind me, the crying continued. But now there were many, different voices of men, women, children, all asking for help, all crying, and among them Helen's voice, as clear as if she were right beside me. "You promised me. You wouldn't leave me alone." The torch began to fade, and, in the last light before the pitch black, I saw something on the ground, a bone amulet with ancient Navajo markings, and around it, impressions of human hands, but with claws instead of fingers. After that, all I remember is the dark and running. I ran without knowing where to go. I only felt the freezing air cutting my face and the sound of the voices mixing behind me, as if the whole forest had woken up. Every time I looked back, I saw flashes of light, reflections, eyes maybe. That crying echoed inside my head, confusing what was memory and what was real. I stumbled, fell, and the flashlight broke. Everything went black. I lay there for a time I can't measure, my heart pounding and my throat dry from breathing in the cold. Gradually the sound faded until only the wind remained. When I managed to get up, I no longer remembered the way back. I walked for hours, guided by the faint light of dawn, until I found the main road. My truck was still there, the engine cold and the headlight on. I got in, started it, and drove without looking in the rearview mirror. It took me 2 days to go back to the mountains. Not out of courage, I just needed to understand. I took old Nathan with me, a Navajo friend who worked as a guide. I told him what I heard and where I had been. He listened in silence without interrupting me until the end. When I finished, he lit a cigarette, looked at the ground, and said, "What called you? You were not supposed to answer." We went to the cave entrance. The opening was still there, but the ground was covered in ashes and burnt feathers. In the center, the bone amulet. Nathan didn't let me touch it. He placed something over it, a handful of herbs and sand, and murmured a low prayer. "Some of them try to remember what they were," he said. "They use the sound of the voices they loved. They call the lonely ones the ones who listen too much." That sentence has stayed with me to this day. If you've made it this far, maybe you also hear things in the dark sometimes. I only ask you one thing: don't answer. And since you stayed with me until the end of this part, leave a like to support, subscribe to the channel to hear more of these accounts, and hit the bell to know when the next one comes out.